Hello everybody, this is lesson 21 of the lecture Macroeconomics. I will discuss the slides 128 to 141 of Chapter 4, the Keynesian model. In this lesson we will analyze the consequences of fiscal policy under the assumptions of the Keynesian model. As we have already seen in chapter 3.2.2, where we analyzed the neoclassical theory, there are two types of fiscal policy depending on their way of financing. Debt-financed fiscal policy and tax-financed fiscal policy. If the government finances its level of consumption, which we symbolize with capital letter G here and in the following, by taxes, we use capital letter T to symbolize the net tax payment of households to the government, and at the same time by new indebtedness, for which we use capital letter D with the index G for government, the following budget constraint results. The level of government expenditure, G, is financed with the help of taxes the government receives from households, and if this is not enough, if tax income of the government is smaller than government expenditure for consumption purposes, then the government runs into debt and borrows money on the credit market equal to the amount represented by capital letter GG. To simplify the following analysis, we will analyze only debt-financed fiscal policy. So we assume that government tax income is zero, such that total government consumption expenditure has to be financed with debt which the government borrows on the capital market. Under Keynesian assumptions, tax-financed fiscal policy has basically the same result as debt-financed fiscal policy, yet the strength of the effect is somewhat weaker. The reason for this is that if government expenditure grows and taxes have to be increased, this reduces government disposable income, such that the consumption multiplier effect is completely eliminated. So tax-financed fiscal policy causes an increase of total GDP equal to the initial increase of government expenditure. There is no additional multiplier effect from consumption. This effect is called Havelmo theorem, according to the name of its discoverer, the Norwegian economist Trygve Havelmo. The Havelmo theorem is the reason why Keynesian economists typically recommend no tax-financed fiscal policy, but only debt-financed fiscal policy. We will therefore focus in the following on debt-financed fiscal policy only. Starting point of the analysis is a situation where a demand-side recession has caused GDP to fall to a level of Y2 below its full employment level Y1. As a result, this is now a situation with Keynesian unemployment. In order to overcome Keynesian unemployment and the recession, it is necessary to restore a GDP equal to Y1. GDP level of Y1 corresponds in this diagram to 30 units GDP, so this is necessary to overcome the recession and restore full employment. But currently we have a GDP level of Y2, which corresponds to 20 units GDP, which is not sufficient to have full employment. This is a situation, GDP level, that goes hand in hand with Keynesian unemployment. We assume in the initial situation that government consumption is zero for simplicity. As a result, government consumption does not appear as a component of total demand. So total demand has only two components: consumption by households plus investment by firms. And here we have assumed that investment goods demand by firms equals 10 units, the length of two little quads, which is equal to the total credit demand at the capital market equilibrium. So it is an equilibrium on both markets, the capital market and the market for goods, but it is an equilibrium with unemployment. What happens then in this situation if the government rises its government consumption from 0 to, let's say, 5 units, the length of one little quad, and finances this expenditure with new debt equal to also 5 units, the length of one little quad, borrowed on the capital market? This is the question we are going to analyze now. First, let's have a look on the market for goods. The rise of government consumption from 0 to 5 units raises total demand for goods by 5 units, of course. So we have to shift the total demand curve upwards by 5 units, the length of one little quad. This is now our total demand curve. Now it has 3 components: consumption of households plus investment goods demand by firms plus government consumption demand. The multiplier effect causes household consumption demand to grow by additional 5 units, such that total demand grows by 10 units. This is what happens on the market for goods. But now we still have to finance this additional government expenditure with credits on the capital market. To finance this additional government consumption on the credit market, the credit demand grows by the government demand for credits, of course, equal to 5 units, the length of one little quad. So we have to shift the total credit demand curve to the right by the length of one little quad. Taken for itself, this increase in the credit demand would cause an increase of the interest rate, since the new intersection point with the savings supply curve lies now here on this level, which is higher as it was before. At this higher interest rate level, investment demand by firms would fall to this level. As a result, this could cause a similar crowding out effect as under the assumptions of the neoclassical model. However, this does not happen, since the increase in income by 10 units, which we have observed here on the market for goods as a result of the increase of government expenditure, this increase in income by 10 units causes an increase of savings by 50%, the savings ratio, times 10 units, which equals 5 units, the length of one little quad. So this means that savings supply grows also by the length of one little quad. As a result, credit demand grows by the same amount as credit supply, and the interest rate stays constant. Does in fact not grow, therefore it does not come to a crowding out. A crowding out takes not place under Keynesian assumptions. That's the important difference between fiscal policy under Keynesian assumptions and fiscal policy under neoclassical assumptions. The rise of GDP to its full employment level increases the demand for labor, because in order to produce more GDP, private firms will need more labor. If GDP actually grows to a level which we have called the full employment level, this will restore full employment. So Keynesian employment will disappear as a result. Let's analyze this with the help of the production module of the Keynesian model. The increase of GDP from its recession level Y2 to its full employment level Y1, caused by the increase of government consumption, causes an increase in the short-run demand for labor, from labor demand depending on the recession GDP level Y2 to labor demand depending on the full employment GDP level Y1. As a result, Keynesian unemployment disappears. We are now back at full employment labor demand, and hence the recession is overcome. If the increase of government consumption had been lower than 5 units, Keynesian unemployment would not have completely disappeared. If the increase of government consumption had been stronger than 5 units, GDP would grow stronger than the full employment level Y1, and hence labor demand would grow above the long-run full employment level L1. This would cause an overheating of the economy, as we have already discussed in the preceding section. For simplicity, we have assumed here that the government knows exactly by how much to increase government consumption, and in order to just realize the full employment level of GDP. So this is only a simplification. In reality, the government would have to use a trial and error strategy in order to get as close as possible to the full employment level of GDP. To sum up, what happens if the government rises government consumption from 0 to 5 units and finances these additional expenditures with new debt borrowed on the credit market equal to 5 units? The increase in the demand for goods by government consumption causes a positive consumption multiplier process, which we have already discussed in section 4.1.1. Therefore, GDP grows finally by 10 units from 20 to 30 units. At a GDP level of 30, total savings of households equal 30 times the savings ratio of 50%, which equals 15 units. The increase in GDP causes hence an increase in savings to a level just large enough to finance the government demand for additional credits equal to 5 units without causing the interest rate to rise. Consequently, contrary to the neoclassical theory, no crowding out of private consumption or investment takes place here. The rise of government consumption, in a certain sense, finances itself via its expansionary effect on GDP. To produce a higher GDP, firms need more labor input. Consequently, the demand for labor grows. Consequently, Keynesian unemployment is reduced by the additional government consumption. But a little bit caution is here necessary. In the above graphical example, the increase in government consumption by 5 units is just enough to completely eliminate initial unemployment. This must, of course, not necessarily be the case. If government consumption grows to a higher level than just 5 units, the increase in labor demand will be higher than necessary to establish full employment. And if government consumption grows to a lower level than 5 units, then the increase in labor demand will be lower than necessary to re-establish full employment. So we've made here the simplifying assumption that the government exactly knows by how much to increase government consumption in order to completely eliminate unemployment. We will later discuss the problems with government information in order to design the appropriate fiscal policy. Why is fiscal policy able to cause an economic recovery under Keynesian assumptions, but not under the assumptions of the neoclassical model? Well, under the assumptions of the neoclassical model, the supply of goods is fixed by the supply of production factors in last instance. So an increase in the demand for goods cannot cause an increase in the supply for goods. The increase in government debt causes an increase in the demand for credits. Since the supply of goods does, however, not grow, the resulting increase in the interest rate causes a reduction of investment and a reduction of household consumption. This is the reason for the complete crowding out under neoclassical assumptions. government expenditure causes an increase in the interest rate, which causes a decrease of private demand for goods. Under the assumptions of the Keynesian model, however, the supply of goods adjusts to the demand for goods, so that GDP and hence household income grows. The increase in government debt causes an increase in the demand for credits. The increase in GDP causes at the same time an increase in household savings, so that the credit supply grows. The increase in household credit supply is just sufficient to compensate the effect of additional government credit demand on the interest rate. Therefore, an increase in the interest rate does not take place. The interest rate stays constant. Therefore, investment demand for firms does not decrease, and as a consequence, debt-financed expansion of government consumption does not result in a crowding out of private demand. So, this was fiscal policy under the assumptions of the Keynesian model. In the next lesson, we will discuss the consequences of monetary policy under the assumption of the Keynesian model.